Hi, nice to meet you, everyone. My name is Alex Telesnik, Director of Data and Gen AI at OpsGuru. Pass it on to Kenny.
Hello, Kenny Hawk here, CEO of Mojio. Happy to be here.
So the idea about this session is to go through and understand Mojio's migration from Azure to AWS. We'll explore the why behind the migration to AWS. We'll review the work and OpsGuru's approach with Mojio to migrate them. We'll talk about the technical innovations and implementation in this migration, and then we'll assess the business impact that this migration provided to Mojio. Before we jump ahead to the technical portion, I want to introduce OpsGuru, the company I work for. OpsGuru is a premier tier consulting partner for AWS based out of Canada, with a presence in North America and in Europe. We specialize in digital transformation, cloud strategy, migration, and modernization services. We also have a very strong focus on data, AI, and machine learning, and we have a very high reputation for delivering impactful outcomes.
And Mojio is a connected car platform company also based in Vancouver, British Columbia. We've connected over 1.5 million vehicles, and we basically ingest data from vehicles, process that data, and then look for insights to save drivers and owners of fleets either time, money, or make them safer. To do that, we have to process lots of data. We're talking about 20 billion miles of driving data, lots of signals coming out of the different sensors in the vehicles. We have vehicle data, location data, accelerometer data. And we store all that up in the cloud and have to process that in near real time. So complicated end-to-end system from collecting the data in the vehicle, sending it up to the cloud over a wireless connection, processing in the cloud, and then presenting that data either native iOS and Android apps or on a web interface. And if you take a look at our platform, we're cloud agnostic and hardware agnostic. So we could take data from an embedded telematics control unit in a OEM vehicle, from an aftermarket OBD device that's plugged in under the dash, from a video dash cam, or even from a OEM cloud. So do a cloud-to-cloud data ingestion. Once that data comes in, our platform cleans up the data, processes it, and then again, we're looking for either issues related to the vehicle being stolen, disturbed, or in an accident. So real-time crash detection, very accurate crash detection. So we know that there's not only been a crash, but the severity of the crash. Then we also analyze all the signals coming out of the vehicle itself off the CAN bus. So diagnostic trouble codes, odometer, speed, fuel level, and other sensors that are available inside the vehicle CAN bus. And then we take action based on that and alert the user or the owner of the fleet, driver of the car or owner of the fleet, to then take action either to stop driving and have the car towed if it's a severe issue like a failing engine or transmission, or is it something simple they can get fixed the next oil change or next time they fill up the vehicle. And of course, this data impacts many different things, and some of our core use cases are around knowing what's going on with your employees and your vehicles, where have they been, where are they headed, who to assign the next job to. I talked about the repairs and taking care of issues when you have a problem with the vehicle. And then when there is a crash, and everyone unfortunately could be in a crash someday, you want to make sure you detect the crash and get the right kind of help to the right location as soon as possible. And that saves lives. And we're doing these processes, as I mentioned, over 1.5 million vehicles. The end-to-end latency needs to be less than a half a second. And we are allowed to have very little downtime in our contracts with our big customers who are supplier to OEM car companies, large mobile operators, and then thousands of small businesses across North America. So having our system work, being able to deploy it quickly when we add new use cases and making sure that it's running, it's a mission critical application. It was really challenging trying to consider adding another cloud provider at the same time as keeping our current customers up and running and meeting the SLAs. And one of the drivers behind this, beyond the obvious ones of saving money and making it more modern and reliable, was making it easier to deploy. And we'll talk about that a bit at the end of the session. But we also had quite a few customers that had a preference for AWS and really wanted us to have a version of our product running on the AWS platform. So if you look at where we were when we considered this project, we had a fairly complex Azure-centric environment, lots of specific Azure services that were only running on Azure, many things that we could not peel behind the onion to see how they actually ran. We had to trust that they would run, and when they didn't, we were beholden to the speed and the efficacy of Azure. We had Cosmo DB, to handle the big database, and then Azure Message Bus for high volume messaging. So, quite a few custom components, some that had been there from the beginning of the Azure launch. We were right there at the beginning with Azure getting launched. And, you look at the challenges of this, it was difficult to make optimizations. We looked at performance, especially keeping that half a second latency was tough to do and expensive to do in that environment. And we continue to have cost pressure from our large customers, and also being a venture-backed company, driving towards profitability. We wanted to increase our margin and get us to profitability more quickly. The goal was get at least 10-15% reduction in cloud costs, but also modernize the platform so deployments would take hours instead of overnight, and also make it more reliable so you have less outages. We wanted the migration to also be super smooth. And one of the nice things that AWS committed to was bringing in OpsGuru, who had done many of these migrations, to handle a lot of the heavy lifting. So the Mojio engineers could focus on the secret sauce of Mojio. OpsGuru and AWS could do the heavy lifting on everything else, and run that migration parallel to us running our day-to-day business. We wanted to do this migration with as little impact as possible. Of course, it's never going to be zero impact, but we were able to keep it to a reasonable slice of time for some of our key engineers. And I talked about the cost reduction. It was critical to get real cost savings. Otherwise, it's just not worth taking the risk on a multi-quarter project. And then, the icing on the cake would be if we can get some performance improvements and make the platform not only run faster, but also, like I mentioned, making it much easier to do deployments, and to do those deployments with the push of a button, and have it be much simpler to have our DevOps team run our environment up in the cloud. So again, real-time system with millions of vehicles, and you've got hardware, firmware, the connectivity over the wireless network, all the processing happening up in the cloud, and then presenting that in real-time iOS and Android apps. So it's a lot of moving pieces at once, and it's important that every single one of those cogs works seamlessly together.
For the approach that we took to help Mojio migrate, we utilized OpsGuru's Clear Path Forward, which is both a methodology and a product. Clear Path Forward is a discovery and assessment in which, in the end, the client gets a roadmap, the future state architecture, total cost of ownership, and a strategic alignment within the company to understand exactly how the client should approach migration or modernization. Specifically with Mojio, we started with a thorough examination of Mojio's existing infrastructure. We focused on identifying critical Azure dependencies and assessing their impact on migration strategy. This involved understanding the architecture complexity, service integrations, and potential challenges during the transition. We did a detailed dependency mapping of all Azure-specific services and interactions within the Mojio platform. This allowed the team to identify equivalent or improved AWS services that will be used in this new architecture, while ensuring minimal disruption and maintaining platform performance. When we developed the roadmap, a phased approach was created to prioritize smaller but more complex environments, and ensuring that key functionalities were transitioned smoothly. The roadmap included clear timelines, responsibilities, and checkpoints to monitor progress and mitigate the risks. For risk mitigation, we plan for contingencies for potential challenges that we identified during the assessment phase, which includes service compatibility issue, data migration complexities, and refactoring Azure-specific technologies to cloud agnostic or AWS specific services. This ensured that the migration process was resilient and adaptable to unexpected hurdles. Early on, we built very strong lines of communication between OpsGuru, Mojio, and the AWS teams. This ensured that all stakeholders were aligned and informed through the migration process. Regular updates and collaborative planning sessions were key to the successful execution of this roadmap. And both teams from OpsGuru and Mojio were deeply involved in the assessment to make sure that we have as much clear of a roadmap and action items defined for the actual implementation.
Yeah, let's just add in here, as an entrepreneur, I'm impatient by nature, and the early work put into the planning, the analysis, felt like it was a bit overkill, but looking back on it, it was absolutely the right way to do it. And taking time to slow down before doing the migration really paid off in spades over the course of the project. And that's one of the reasons why I believe one of the reasons the project ran on schedule, on budget, and hit all the metrics is the work put in up front. So looking back, I'm glad that we followed OpsGuru's lead on that and took the time to do the initial planning and to do it right.
In terms of the migration strategy that we defined with Mojio, so the approaches were to use ClearPath Forward as the vehicle for assessment, and to use OpsGuru's Cloud Launchpad as the foundational deployment for Mojio's AWS platform. Cloud Launchpad is a product that allows very rapid implementation for foundational best practices on AWS, including logging, monitoring, governance, security, connectivity, and more. Through the assessment, we, as I mentioned, did a comprehensive analysis of the Azure-based architecture to identify very specific components that will need to be refactored, modernized, or rewritten to be able to run on AWS and in a cloud-agnostic nature, as it was very important for Mojio to keep that aspect of the technology. We created the phased roadmap, and then we focused on cost optimization. A large chunk of the work was looking at the current utilization in Azure, mapping it to potential AWS services, and then coming up with the right ones and the most efficient ones to work with. This also informed the decision to use Kubernetes as the platform driving most of the architecture. Most of Mojio's services were running on Azure Service Fabric that didn't have a direct equivalent in AWS. And so the decision was to migrate everything to Kubernetes first. And so this would have been much easier to migrate from Azure to AWS when everything is containerized. And of course, AWS has a comparable Kubernetes infrastructure platform to AKS in Azure as EKS in AWS. We also leveraged AWS's Migration Acceleration Program. This allowed us to offset some of the financial burden for Mojio and to provide Mojio credits for running their infrastructure and to avoid a double bubble and spending for both cloud providers during the migration. From a project overview perspective, the idea was to start with a foundational setup to make sure that Mojio's platform can scale as it's supposed to through multi-region implementation, backup and resiliency, and high-quality connectivity between the different regions. A very important aspect was to implement strict governance controls and security measures so that Mojio's team have operational insight into what's going in the platform. The next phase was application and data migration. That's where containerizing current or previous workloads that ran on Service Fabric happened. Azure functions were refactored to run on Knative. Azure Cosmos DB was migrated to Couchbase and SQL Server and MongoDB, as it doesn't have a comparable service in AWS. And then SQL Server and object storage were replicated to AWS, SQL Server on RDS and object storage on S3. Both teams worked very hard to implement self-hosted monitoring on Kubernetes. The stack is Elasticsearch, Prometheus, and Grafana. There was a big effort to migrate Mojio's Hadoop platform from HD Insights to AWS EMR, and then to also complement that with Amazon QuickSight as the business intelligence and visualization tool. For disaster recovery and resilience, we implemented a pilot-light infrastructure for EKS to make sure that Mojio can fail over to another region in case there is an outage in their primary region. We also implemented Couchbase, cross-data center resiliency, so that Couchbase, as the heart of the operational platform, is able to be failed over as well. S3 object backups were done as S3 bucket replication. And so the platform was made to be as resilient as possible and as highly available as possible.
And if you look at the key technical achievements, we had to have, at the very least, feature parity. So everything we had before had to be there post-transition. And I mentioned the latency. The reason this is important is you're talking about managing vehicles, millions of vehicles on the road. And in the case of emergency crash detection and emergency response, it's a matter of life and death, getting those emergency services to the vehicles as quickly as possible with the right kind of help at the right location on the road. So not only speed, but accuracy of the data. We talked about somewhere in the 10 to 15% cost savings range. We actually achieved over 30. That was a combination of Amazon services just being more cost effective, but also the optimizations that the OpsGuru team, together with our engineers, were able to execute as they modernize the system. So super happy with the cost savings. And when you look at containerizing things and going to microservices, making it more scalable, easier to deploy, again, more automation. It's not only easier to run, but it's also easier to QA. It's easier to deploy new features, and it's gives the DevOps team a lot more confidence in doing more rapid deployments. So in the past, we would have to wait almost a day between the start of a deployment and a full deployment that's bulletproof, and now we're doing those deployments in less than an hour. And we couldn't lose any data. We were able to keep all data, no data loss during this migration process. And we've also improved our security posture. In today's world, you can never be secure enough. We've passed all the security audits by our big OEM customers and operators, but we wanted to continue to improve the security posture. And we did that through this project with OpsGuru and AWS. And then, God forbid something happens where you need to do disaster recovery. The processes had been quite manual, and now they're quite automated and obviously much faster, easier to run. And then the monitoring, we had a lot of homegrown monitoring tools. And, again, when people are expecting things to work and have instantaneous response and know exactly where their vehicles are, what the status is, if you have an outage, you don't want your customers finding out first. You want proactive monitoring, find out and heal, and auto heal where possible. So we also dramatically improved our proactive monitoring that helps find problems before they happen and again, solve them quickly before it has a customer impact. Could not be happier. And on the business, I mentioned 30% cost savings. It's just absolutely breathtaking. So thankful for both AWS and OpsGuru and our team to execute and hitting more than double what our target goal was, and continue to be able to scale our platform. On the future-proofing of the architecture, it's had a couple spill-on effects. One is it's much easier to get engineers with AWS experience than some of the specific experience you need on Azure. So it's made it easier to recruit. And it's also given our engineers the ability to develop on both platforms. And the system is just much more resilient and bulletproof. We've had less outages. When we do have issues, they're taken care of more quickly. And the last piece I'd say, it's also opened up more customers that have AWS commits and want to spend on AWS. And now they could have a connected car solution and have it running within weeks rather than quarters or years to develop it themselves. So being part of the AWS ecosystem has also been a benefit, and we look forward to doing more of that.
Thanks, Kenny. As for the rest of you, if you want to engage with OpsGuru to see how OpsGuru can help you with a cloud migration, how to unlock future-ready solutions, whether it's cloud, data, or AI, you can schedule a consultation with our experts, and you can leverage OpsGuru's Clear Path Forward and Cloud Launchpad to understand how we can approach seamless cloud migrations. Thank you, everyone.